If you clicked on this video, I assume you are either an artist or a supporter of the arts. By now, many of us know at least one arts organization that is permanently closed due to COVID-19, or ones which are barely scraping by through a mixture of state and federal COVID relief grants, and of course donations from the local community. As a full-time teaching artist, I'm associated with 3 small art centers. 2 are in more affluent neighborhoods full of professionals who highly value the arts, and so these centers are well supported. This means that they will most certainly continue to exist. The handful of full-time employees at these centers will also thankfully keep their jobs. However, most of us teaching artists who are independent contractors were temporarily laid off, and the luckiest among us, due to the CARES Act, collected at least some unemployment. But we were already part of the gig economy, so yeah, I suppose we're used to careers that are just an ongoing, unstable hustle. This brings me to the 3rd and smallest art center with which I'm affiliated. Years ago, I responded to a call for a children's ceramic instructor. The studio couldn't offer me any kind of decent hourly wage, so instead we bartered. I could teach in exchange for access to studio time, materials, and firings. I was given mostly free rein over how to structure my classes, and over time I developed strong, long-term relationships with several students. I also developed friendships and engaged in collaborations with my studio mates. In other words, I had taken on an integral role at a community arts center. It didn't pay me anything, but it was incredibly valuable, not only to myself, but to others associated with the studio. Then COVID happened. Like everyone else, we had to stop classes and take the loss of revenue. Thankfully, we were able to organize a system where the most active studio members could continue using the studio in shifts and with strict safety protocols in place. That brought in some revenue to keep us afloat, as we held on to the hope that summer camp, our greatest source of revenue, would not be canceled. But of course, the pandemic was still a serious enough threat that we had to cancel summer camp, and then the financial situation started getting dire. So we did what most individuals and organizations did in 2020 America when in dire financial straits. We started a GoFundMe. It did okay, but not well enough. We also applied for relief from the state, and that helped quite a bit. And then we started gathering donations of artwork from our students and members for an auction. And we needed every dollar from all those efforts. We restructured our business plan entirely so that necessary revenue going forward could be raised by adult use of the studio rather than relying on summer camps and classes. And this worked. In other words, it took a lot, but we survived. My own household skated through 2020 mostly unscathed, and so I felt obligated to give as much as I could. And while I gave to a variety of causes and organizations, I felt mostly moved to help this one small art studio survive because I wanted it to continue existing for the sake of myself, my students, my neighbors, and my friends in the organization. Because it was a small center and one in which I was an integral member, I knew my help could make a big difference, opposed to the food relief organization that I donated $100 to as soon as I saw photos of kids in food lines. That food bank has an annual budget in the millions, and at this point they've probably spent a fair chunk of my relatively puny donation printing the full-color mailers that they send me asking for further donations. If I was a billionaire, or even a millionaire, I could do a lot of good for a lot of hungry and homeless people without sacrificing any of my own comfort, and I'd probably receive public praise for it. But clearly the super rich aren't doing enough, because federal food assistance in America feeds far more people than private charities and food banks. Individuals are just more likely to contribute to causes we feel personally connected to and where we feel we can make a real difference, and these are not necessarily the most pressing priorities for society at large. But hey, art is a worthy cause. After all, it's a public good, right? If you have any hesitation about answering yes to that question, I highly recommend Daniel Bainbridge of The Origin of Everything's video, Why Does Government Pay for Art? I'll include a link below. Incidentally, that channel was recently canceled because PBS didn't have the funds to continue it, but it was excellent, and if you haven't checked it out, you totally should. I have had this quote that I love from R. Crumb hanging in my studio for many years. It used to be that people fermented their own culture, you know? It took hundreds of years, and it evolved over time. And that's gone in America. People now don't even have any concept that there ever was a culture outside of this thing that's created to make money. Whatever's the biggest, latest thing, they're into it. You just get disgusted after a while with humanity for not having more kind of like intellectual curiosity about what's behind all this jive bullshit. After having devoted a significant portion of my time and resources to collaborating with other artists at a neighborhood studio, I feel like I more than ever understand what Crumb meant by saying people fermented their own culture that evolved over time. It's not something that can be manufactured. It's something that develops organically. I thought about all the local art centers, galleries, and theaters in my area that have been raising relief funds, and which I felt compelled to donate to, partially because my community benefits from them, and partially because they are small enough that the modest donations that I can afford might actually make a difference. There was Quintessence, a classic repertory theater just a few blocks from my house, which over the past decade has produced shows that put money into hiring equity actors for most major roles, and featured diverse casts, and addressed many serious topics in a manner that is both emotionally and intellectually engaging. There was the Colored Girls Museum, built into a residential home in a predominantly working-class black neighborhood in Philadelphia, which collects and presents objects and installations that tell stories and share the perspectives of, as they put it, ordinary girls and women of color. There was also Imperfect Gallery, a community gallery that presents exhibitions by local artists, both professional and amateur, sometimes expanding beyond the walls of the white cube, sometimes including live events and performances, and often addressing issues of shared concern. Those three are just in my little neck of the woods. They are making, sharing, and preserving experiences, ideas, and artifacts, fermenting culture, as Crumb would put it. When it comes to these smaller arts institutions, the problem is that the people who give the most are often those benefiting the most, which sounds reasonable until you realize that in low-income communities, that's low-income people. A $1,000 donation is no big deal to someone earning $300,000 a year, but for someone earning less than the individual median income of about $33,000 a year, that's a huge sacrifice. For the Outlaw Arts GoFundMe, we had single mothers and retired folks living on a fixed income donating larger amounts than millionaires. Maybe that's because to those low-income people, a small arts organization in our neighborhood, where we've made personal connections, has provided us with the sort of meaningful benefits we won't be able to get anywhere else, while the millionaires have plenty of other options when it comes to their personal fulfillment and creative outlets. If we talk about how we can cultivate the arts, the standard call is for more federal, state, and city funding of the arts, and that is all very important. Sarah Green of the Art Assignment made an excellent video making an argument that favors the public funding of art, which I'll also link to below. That said, federal and state funding of the arts is top-down, and it doesn't necessarily empower low-income people to drive the arts in their communities. Another solution that could run parallel to robust public funding of the arts is to restructure our economy in a manner that raises the standard of living for those at the bottom. Rather than just giving money to gatekeepers in the art world, give more money directly to low-income people through raising the minimum wage and providing universal basic income and Medicare for all, and increasing food assistance and the earned income tax credit. When people are freed from having to spend most of their time merely surviving, they get creative and social. They might go to more concerts and shows, read a poem at an open mic, start a band, or learn to paint. Or maybe they'll do some really weird stuff. Who knows? The point is to make the arts more democratic by empowering the people to make decisions about not only how much funding the arts receives, but also what art is funded. The artist Horace Pippin grew up poor and as a child taught himself to draw and paint. As a young man, he fully devoted himself to painting because he had injured his arm in World War I and therefore wasn't able to do the kind of physical labor typically offered to men of his race and class. Because of his background, his paintings showed scenes of life rarely depicted in art. They often addressed poverty, segregation, and war, and in a style that was bold yet intimate. Eventually, his paintings were recognized by elites in the art world, and after his death, he was celebrated as one of the greatest Black American artists of the century. Every time I teach my students about Horace Pippin, I think, what if he never injured his arm? Artist Joseph Beuys famously said, "Everyone is an artist," which those who would never pick up a guitar or a paintbrush might scoff at, But what Boys meant was that the impulse to make meaning through unexpected connections is fundamental to human nature. Few will produce huge, high-quality bodies of work like Horace Pippin, but shouldn't more of the stories, scenes, and sentiments of the working class be represented through art? Shouldn't more low-income people have access to enjoy art and support art made by people like them and which speaks to their experiences? Or should they just be content with the daily grind that leaves them too exhausted for anything other than mass media entertainment? Is art just a luxury for the middle class and rich? Or is it a fundamental part of the human experience? Plenty of evidence points toward the latter. In other words, we should be outraged that current socioeconomic systems so often prevent low-income people from engaging with and gaining artistic representation in the arts. It's a violation of their fundamental human rights, badly in need of redress.
So you found it in the dumpster, huh? I guess it does sort of spruce up the place.